Clubhouse.
Only fire has a more disruptive effect upon the order of the forest than a blizzard. Whole herds of cattle and buffalo and elk will wander maddening circles until the snowdrifts cover them, and they are frozen in place. The blizzard drives man and animal both mad with hunger and cold, and the disorienting nature of no sun or moon, which is to say, no direction, no compass to guide movement or reason.
Welcome to Pod Clubhouse's coverage of 1923, a prequel series to the Yellowstone. This is Caroline.
And this is Mike. Tonight we're discussing episode 2 of season 2, The Rapist is Winter. Like last week, tonight's episode was written by Taylor Sheridan and directed by Ben Richardson.
Just a community note, please join us on Facebook in the Yellowstone 1923, 1883, and 4/6's discussion and news group to discuss 1923 and the whole universe of Yellowstone shows. There's so many now. Just a reminder, you guys, we are not going to go step by step and recap this episode, so please go watch if you haven't already. We don't want to spoil you for anything. Put us on pause, go watch, and come on back.
Good Lord, Caroline, what is with the title of this episode, especially coming off of last week's episode and the content?
Disturbing, y'all. The Rapist is Winter. Yeesh. I don't like the sounds of this one, but I have to say, overall, I liked this episode better than the first episode of the season.
It moved things along. It moved things along, but at the same time, I watched the 52 minutes, and at the end, I was like, not a ton happened. I guess a lot of progress was made for Spencer's storyline. Pretty much everyone else was kind of just spinning in place and just more bad things happening to people.
I would say table setting stuff, right? I mean, like,
sure.
Obviously not a lot happened in this one, but we're definitely setting our little chess pieces up to move forward in episode 3.
I want to talk about real quickly the intro clip that we played. This is Elsa talking about how the winter and the blizzard, it drives us mad, drives the animals mad. But it was the end of the clip that really kind of appealed to me for this episode. It was that there's no sun, there's no moon, which is to say there's no compass, no direction, no compass to guide movement. And this is the part, or reason. I feel like, especially Jacob making the decision to go into the blizzard, and
I think Spencer made some pretty questionable decisions in this one too.
Spencer, choosing a dangerous path. Yes, there was a lack of reason here, and brought on by the winter, which down in Galveston did not seem particularly wintry, but maybe the time of the year was still, the concept was still there. The metaphor still works, I think. So.
Just to be clear, guys, it's February 26, 2025 right now, and I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt in Houston, so it's and actually Galveston is another 45 minutes south of me, so it's warm.
Just in the top of the general thoughts section, just want to give a quick welcome to Jennifer Carpenter, who joins the show this week for a recurring part, playing the real-life female marshal, Mamie Fawcett.
We will go with Mamie.
Mamie, I think Mamie's right. Mamie sounds...
Mamie sounds wrong.
Yeah, it sounds wrong in 2025. So let's go with Mamie Fawcett.
Yeah.
Like Mamie Gummer from Gilded Age.
Yeah, I think exactly the same.
I also got to talk about what the fuck with the lion that last week, the wolf this week is, and Elizabeth being at the center of it all. It made me think: is the show telling us that Elizabeth is a metaphor for being prey?
I think she's definitely like a sitting duck, in terms of like she doesn't know how to protect herself. She doesn't really know the ins and outs of being on a ranch, despite the fact that she has been there for quite some time. It seems like there's some specific steps, and I'm just guessing because I don't live on a ranch, but there seems like there'd be specific things that you might do. Like you might peep outside before you just burst outside. You might peep into the chicken coop before you just run into the chicken coop. Like there's just things that I think, she's still very naive and new to this life. And I think that just makes her extremely vulnerable.
Right. I'm sure the wolf did not close whatever door he came in through behind him, even though the main coop door was closed. And you think after the lion experience, either she would be carrying a gun, whether she knew how to use it or not, or would have one of the cowboys. I mean, Blade is his name, was around. And he's the one who eventually shot the gun to scare the wolf off. Though I'll tell you, the wolf with his bloody, gross mouth did not go very far. That was not a normal wolf. That was like a Casey wolf.
Very. I was feeling very Casey. For those of you guys who have not been watching Yellowstone, maybe you're going to start off with 1883 and maybe you're going to watch all the way through here. Wolf and wolf symbolism comes up a ton in Yellowstone, and it is very meaningful to the Dutton clan. So this is a big deal that we have a wolf who is very negative presence for us, because that's not always the case with Casey. You know, it's not always a negative when the wolf's around. I'm very curious about this, but I am really feeling like Elizabeth just is at the end of her string here. Like, I just don't know how much more she's got going on.
No, and the episode really only gets worse for her, if you can imagine. I mean, it's Cowboy Spade, by the way, not Cowboy Blade. I picked the wrong weapon. It's Cowboy Spade.
Gotcha.
So, you know, Kara says to Elizabeth, and I think we're all thinking it, if not for bad luck, you'd have no luck at all. And then I thought kind of rudely, was like, your face was the bargain for all of your bad luck. I don't know.
I don't
think
say to someone, for sure. It's basically like you got the beauty, but you don't got the brains. And it's like, ooch, that was a harsh, Kara.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're Kara, how many times you got to save somebody before you're like, hey, maybe you are not doing the best things you could be doing right now. I give Kara a lot of credit that she's not actually breaking harder than she is right now.
She is the polar opposite of Elizabeth, though, and maybe she wasn't when she was Elizabeth's age, and we're catching her some 50 years beyond.
Don't you feel like Kara was always capable?
I think Kara was probably always capable, is the point. Yeah, she was made for this life in a way that Elizabeth is absolutely not made for this life.
And she certainly didn't have any of the upbringing to be able to, rise to the challenge of this ranch life. I got to tell you, this entire scene with Dr. Miller and everything that was going on with the forced rabies shots, I mean, first of all, that needle was insane. Secondly, we talked about this in the first episode about how the place of women in society right now. Elizabeth is a grown woman. She has been pregnant. She is married. She's getting no say in her medical care. This is one of those things that for me, it was really hit my heart hard, because even you have Kara and you have the people who she loves and trusts holding her down and forcing the situation. Now, my mom was a nurse for 50 some years, and I can tell you one of her lines was always, you got to think of the greater good. Okay. So if you got to have a shot, you got to have a procedure, whatever's going on with you, you've got to look at the greater good here, even though this is going to hurt. I think they could have given Elizabeth a half second to explain a little bit more to her about what would be the consequences if you didn't have the shot. And, let's work on this together, not just hold her down and shoot her in the belly with a shot.
Let's talk about that, though, because her reaction out of the gate was so heightened. It was an 11 immediately on a 1 to 10 scale.
That needle was huge.
Okay, it had to be something beyond the needle, though. Yes, the needle was huge, but for me, I don't know if it was something PTSD, because this would have been Dr. Miller, who I guess he would have also been the physician who said the famous flushed when she talked about losing the baby, which was only a couple of months ago. So I wonder if it was less about the needle and maybe more about the doctor and the PTSD of that.
Let's go back to our control theme and just say, I mean, the second someone starts to restrain your arms, I don't really care what they're going to do and what level of badness it is. The second someone starts holding you down, that's a fear that I think most of us feel pretty deep in our souls, that this is insane. And for Elizabeth, who is just really grasping at straws here, trying to find some amount of sanity in her day, I can imagine that being held down and having someone do this to you. I mean, could you feel any more manhandled and completely like the whole world is just coming at you all the time, whether it's wild animals or even a doctor or even family you love and care for, they're all holding you down and doing these things to you against your will.
How do you go make a cake the next morning with Kara in the kitchen after she was telling Spade to hold her down?
I don't know how it doesn't affect your relationship pretty negatively. So
also, 12 shots in 10 days is an insane amount of shots to be taking.
It is, but it's true. I mean, unfortunately, I know people who have had to do rabies shots in their bellies, and it's very unpleasant. And the shots are extremely painful, even now. So I can't imagine with the gauge needles and stuff they were using back then and how much more crude everything was. Even now, rabies shots are very painful. So this would have been really a horrendous experience for her.
Let's fast
and
forward.
The lack of trust, right? Like, how much trust would you be losing there with these people you're living with?
I mean, I think all gone because like you said, it wasn't the doctor really pushing it. It was Kara pushing it as well, and from the right place, because she's probably right, especially given how the episode ends with the wolf. It's very possible that wolf is rabid given its actions. That's not normal wolf behavior as far as I'm aware. But you're right. You get her a drink or something, So
have a conversation. It wasn't one of those things where she was actively like bleeding out on the floor.
Or foaming or whatever.
Yeah, and you had like 1 second to quick get this in like an epi shot or something, like an EpiPen kind of thing. They had a minute. They could have explained.
No, it escalated on top of
Here's everything
itself.
That's going to happen and everything. But I think that's kind of the point, is that everyone is past the point of like niceties and even just like common courtesy of like, how many doctors don't explain the treatment before they just start shooting stuff into your body? Like, not cool, right?
No, but definite party foul. But the episode being what it is, it takes us to kind of a breaking point. Let's get to the end of the episode. Kara heads upstairs to get blankets for the doctor and the nurse who are going to be staying over because the storm is so bad, and she hears Elizabeth crying, and that's where we pick up with this clip.
This is too much. This is too much. I love him, but this isn't living. This is surviving. Barely at that.
Winters are always hard. And this one has been harder than most. But then the spring comes, and there's nothing so splendid as the mountains in the spring. Wait till you see it.
I won't be here to see it. When the storm passes, I'm going home.
Couple things here. One, are you surprised Kara doesn't respond to that? She just kind of looks, maybe slightly rolls her eyes, and then just leaves it as is.
I think given the situation at this point where, she's just had this entire like restraining situation and the whole scare with the wolf in general, I think that Kara, I'm going to give her credit and say like Elizabeth is not in the right frame of mind to have any type of civil conversation right now. So let her vent, let her say, I'm leaving, I'm done with this. Give her some time, let her sleep a little, and then come back. So I'm going to give Kara wisdom points here to not try to push this conversation right now. It's just not the right time.
And where is home? Where is home for Elizabeth? Where does Elizabeth think home is? Home is back east, because if you remember, her mother let the farm go. That's actually where Whitfield lives. He lives on their old ranch. And the mother, when the father was killed in the Banner ambush, took the body and they headed back east. And originally one member wanted Elizabeth to go with, or demanded, and Kara stuck up for Elizabeth and said she's a grown woman, she's a married woman, she can make her own choices, and she chose to stay. How in the dead of winter
to go, you have to be cool about that too.
Right, but also, I mean, logistically I'm speaking, I mean, they can't even get a carriage into the ranch at this moment. Even when the storm passes, she's not going anywhere for quite a while, and even if she is, who's paying for her to go back east?
I think this is just one of those things. It's like, you just got to let the girl vent. I mean, this was a horrible, no good, very bad day for Elizabeth.
Two back to back. I mean, the line, if we're believing the time frames, the line was just the morning before. Elizabeth should just take a break.
And her husband Jack wears those ridiculous chaps that crack me up every single time I see them. So she's got that to deal with too. Her husband's an embarrassment of chap wearing.
You know what? Actually, more about Jack. It's actually more about his severe part he wears in his hair.
Dude, he looks like he skinned a sheepdog to get those chaps.
It's cold, Caroline. It is so cold. It's not as cold as London, England at this time, but it is cold. It is cold here.
Well, I don't care. None of the other men are wearing those.
Well, the other men are real men. So
no.
Let's head down to the Panhandle, and we get only a little bit of Tiona in this episode. Tiona runs his horse, and Pete. They have one scene in this episode. That's it. It is the morning after, and I would call it a walk of not quite shame. They come up with a very flimsy story, and Runs His Horse decides not to press about what they did or did not do all of yesterday afternoon and evening and overnight. Were you surprised that Runs His Horse kind of freaked out as he did, learning that they are in Texas on a rancher's land versus Oklahoma on Comanche land like he thought, to the point where he's immediately like, back up, we gotta go.
Once he figured out what was going on, I think that he was showing a lot of maturity and wisdom and experience to say, no. We got to go find out who owns this land, and we've got to talk to them and let them know we're on this land. I mean, I think that was very adult way of thinking, as opposed to let's just kind of hide on the land and hope no one finds us. That's a very teenage way of doing things. But I think that he was handling things very responsibly, thinking, we've really got to figure out who owns this area, and let's just have a conversation so that we don't have any problems. The last thing they need is to have anyone else be angry at them right now or be hunting for them right now. So my favorite part of that actually is when they were talking about how they fell asleep, on the riverbank or whatever, and runs his horse. Is like, I hate it when that happens.
Yeah.
I thought that was very cute and funny, and like a little moment of comic relief.
He also gave, when he saw them kind of like slinking back into the campsite, he gave a kind of sound. It was very funny.
Oh my goodness. I know you don't have daughters, so I don't know, and mine are not old enough to be doing anything like this. So for me, I'm like, I don't know how it would feel if I have to like watch my daughter walk back to camp and sort of be like, hey.
Well, he had the whole night to process the fact that she ran off the second he told her she didn't actually have to wait for the ceremony. So yeah. I don't think, he's a man of the world to an extent. I mean, he had a daughter. So I was impressed that he let Tiona and Pete convince him to not pack up and leave and head to the res and listen to Tiona's arguments, which, again, born of her very specific experience. The res is not guaranteed to be better. They have the schools there. They have all sorts of rules there, which may not favor us. We're in a decent spot here. And so they found a middle ground. And so I like that they all listen to each other. I feel like a lot of TV shows and movies will depict a father and a daughter and the daughter's boyfriend not speaking together, kind of speaking at each other versus talking to each other.
And let's compare just the previous scene we were just talking about. Here you have Elizabeth, who's older than Tiona, and we have, no one listening to her, and no one, they're just holding her down, making her do things. And, here at least we have this, like you said, this very civil conversation amongst people who are respecting each other and making a decision together. Like, yeah, it actually felt very refreshing that they had that when we just come off the heels of let's hold everybody down and put shots in their bellies.
Right. I mean, he could have held her down and said, get on the horse, and
he could
tied her and thrown her over the back or something.
Yeah. But he didn't. He respected her. And I really appreciate that about him.
Let's talk about our villains a little bit. So I was happy to see that they listened to us and they got Whitfield out of his house of horrors and decided. And I asked for a Jenkins-like villain, and they came up with a very Jenkins, Margaret Equities in the modern Yellowstone parlance kind of scheme in this episode. But let's talk about the first conversation, because I feel like Whitfield's initial conversation with Banner, I think, goes directly to what we were talking about last week, and about control, about the conversation that Runs His Horse had about why government is the way it is, but also the way Whitfield conducts his business and the way he controls people and exercises his power and dominance. The first thing out of his mouth to Banner when they're in the car is, you're not using the house that he provided, and that's bothering him. And I thought that was interesting, because obviously if he's not using the house that Whitfield provided for him, that's an aspect of control he does not have over him.
And he did seem very bothered by that. I mean, he definitely wanted to have the control. What also kind of surprised me about that, though, is we know those prostitutes are living in the house, right? I
think that's a different house. I think there's two.
Oh, are you sure?
Maybe not, actually. It might be the same house.
I'm not sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm going to throw that out to our audience. Are there two different houses, guys? One house? I'm not sure. I thought that the idea of him obviously not staying in town, I thought we kind of discussed in our last episode that it was about keeping his wife and his family away from
I think
prostitution and all that kind of stuff. And so...
Well, either to keep it away from his activities when he is in town, because remember, he did use those sex workers before Whitfield took them back, or it was to keep them from Whitfield himself, which, given his conversation later in the speakeasy with Clyde, the traitorous livestock commission officer, maybe it really was the latter. Maybe it really was just his fear of him. But before we get to that, let's finish off this conversation in the car, because if you're Banner, going through what you have gone through with the sheep and the Duttons and the hanging and everything that happened in the first half of season 1, to hear Whitfield laughing in your face when you admit that you had to slaughter the flock because of the flukes, which I had never heard of flukes before. Flukes are a flatworm parasite that can infect sheep and cattle and sometimes people, which is gross. And they have little suckers on them, and it's very disgusting. To hear this grown man laughing at you, also a grown man with a lot of pride, Banner had to be balling up his fist at that. To hear that that's not a business, that's not peasant, that's what he said, it's the toil of peasants. And then he says, Banner, you're no longer a peasant, which I think what he means is you're no longer a peasant because I elevated you.
Oh, definitely. He's taking full credit for that. Yeah.
And the idea that, for all Banner sacrifice to be laid low by worms, and then just laughing at him and then saying things like gold doesn't get worms. That's a business. Gold and mining is a business. Whereas ranching, I think the people involved with 1923 and Yellowstone and 1883, I think they all very much believe ranching is a business and is a lifeblood business.
Oh, certainly. And not any type of peasant job at all. I mean,
no.
Right. But I mean, this is different because Banner is sort of a faux rancher. I mean, he is not a Yellowstone style rancher. He's somebody who's definitely at a lower level, who's more just, he's just more of a sustenance farmer for himself, really. And this isn't really about making a lot of money off of this. I mean, we know that they have like their grass roof home and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, we know that they are struggling. Whitfield is definitely interested in messing with Banner in a way that I like it, but I'm like really trying to kind of like pay attention to like, how much does he care about Banner being a successful person?
I don't think at all.
Versus just using him.
Yeah, I don't think he cares about him beyond his utility to him. And I think
you say that, but he's kind of, in a diabolical way, he's mentoring him. I mean, he's sitting here talking to him about business. He's telling him, this is how you make money. This is what you do. For someone like Whitfield, I mean, his time is money. And if he's spending time with you, having conversations about business and how to do it, that is something he is like feeding into you for a reason. I mean, obviously he wants to be associated with successful people around him as well. So, I mean, it makes sense for Whitfield for him to want Banner to be successful as well. But how all in do you think he cares about Banner? And I don't mean caring in a loving way, but I mean like for his own pride's sake, Banner needs to be successful.
I don't think he gives one iota of a shit beyond his utility to him. I think Banner presented himself at the right moment for the land grab that Whitfield wanted to seize upon, and he found a natural enemy. Right, this is all about prey and predators. This is how we kind of started the episode with Elizabeth and the lion and the wolf. He needed a predator, or at least a natural enemy, to the Duttons and their cattle, and Banner and his sheep, and beyond that, I mean, it's the Scottish-Irish thing. It literally goes down to those roots. If you go back to season 1, when they're standing in the lot trading like ethnic slurs to each other about being Irish versus Scottish, and I think the Duttons have the prize that Whitfield wants, so he needed a man on the ground of the area, because even for Banner, they're going to be wary of an outsider, and Whitfield is an outsider. So by using Banner and keeping him close, it gives him credibility in the area, and he's muscle, and he's not afraid of getting into fights and shooting gun and doing the violence that Whitfield himself does not want to do. But I think that's as far as it extends. I think the second either Banner is a liability or he needs a scapegoat, I think Banner gets pushed in the way as a human shield.
I agree with you. I also think, though, that he doesn't have Banner under his thumb as much as he would like. And I think that's actually important for Whitfield, because you know how when it comes to like financial ethics and such, there's certain jobs that you can't have if you're somebody who can be easily corrupted. And so Banner's financial well-being matters to Whitfield, because if he is like, in this tenuous spot with everything happening, well, then he's easy pickings for someone else to come and corrupt and take and maybe do something bad to Whitfield. So I do think that there's something a little bit more about investing in Banner because it matters. Like his whole thing is only as secure as the henchmen kind of people, as much as he can trust them.
No, I think that's a good point. But I also think you're right, though, that he understands implicitly, maybe even in a way that Banner doesn't really fully appreciate, and maybe does subconsciously, that he doesn't have his full control. Because if he did, Banner would be at that house. He would not be spending time with his wife and his son. He would be up in the bedroom and at the house and partaking in the delights that Whitfield is arranging for him. And again, circling back, just the bookend back to the beginning of the conversation, that's where the tone of his voice was anger at him not using the house. And not because he gives a shit about him using the house, but because of the control it represents over him using the house. If he's using the house, that further cements the control over him.
Yeah, and Banner owes him that much more, you know?
Yeah.
He's in debt then. And that's a big deal. Well, we discussed the beggars in the last episode and how much you want people to be asking for a handout like that, asking for something so that you can be the one giving it and then you have the control.
I think one of Whitfield's downfalls is I think he does understand people. I think he does understand manipulation, and he does understand what makes most people tick in most ways, which is one of the things Banner will go on to cite later in the episode as what fears him, that he can see through and see the greed in our hearts. But he doesn't speak to Banner with a respectful tone that I think someone prideful like Banner will grate upon him. We talked already about him laughing in his face and calling his job a peasant's toil and laughing about all he has sacrificed in season 1 just for worms to lay him low. But then he also says, you don't have vision. No one wants to be told that they don't have vision. I mean, that's,
right.
But it gets us to, this is after he has seen the Norwegians skiing down the mine shaft hill. And it gets us to this audio clip, which I think is extremely revealing, especially for fans of mainline Yellowstone.
Seems a silly way to waste the day to me.
Does it now? How many gunfights you been in?
My fair share.
How many bar fights?
More than I can count.
And after, how did you feel?
Alive. Which was the goal?
If you liked it, tell the truth. You liked the danger of it.
I gets your blood up, eh?
Hell, your rancher aside. It's a rich man's world now, and everyone gets a taste. The paperman, the tradesman, the car salesman, the doctor, the lawyer. The one thing you cannot buy in a store is the euphoria of peril, the exhilaration of danger. I can sell that for a fortune.
And so begins a plotline that will literally go on for a century, trying to turn Bozeman and Montana and Yellowstone into a premier ski resort like Jackson Hole. It's wild that we actually got to see this start here because some Norwegian miners were skiing down a hill.
Yeah, they're just playing. They learned in the military and they're just kind of horsing around.
I could teach my mom. My grandma does it. But you don't have vision, Banner. I mean, that started before they actually had that conversation. That was just him in the car. He said, you don't have vision. But then even the clip that I just played starts with, seems like a silly way to spend an afternoon to me. Yes, there is an aspect of mentoring it, but it's like the way Mr. Burns mentors Smithers, through degradation and humiliation. It's a little bit like that relationship to me.
A little bit, but very well-versed Simpsons lover over here. Mr. Burns never shows his cards as to how he comes up with ideas or the process of anything. And he just basically walked Banner through the process of how you pick something and then how do you extrapolate that out into making money. So I'm just saying, people who have a lot of money like that, they do not have to share how they do it. And yet he is explaining things to Banner. He is mentoring.
But do you think he is, though, for any reason beyond it furthers his own interest?
him just explaining his big fat idea makes him feel good. So even if all he needs is Banner to be like, wow, like you're so smart, that's all he needs. He just needs some ego stroke. But what I'm saying is that like he is willing to explain the process. And in that way, Banner is us. Banner is the audience. He's explaining to us, how do you see something like this? And then how do you create an empire out of it? We're just seeing some people who we think are playing in the snow. But how do you make that turn into this gigantic fortune? That part, it's true that people like Banner, they are the ones living day to day, week to week, moment to moment, and they don't have the luxury to have vision, because in order to do that, you have to be able to make it through this week with no worries in order to be able to sit there and make a plan that's much bigger than that.
Vision is a luxury most can't afford. That is true.
Not at all. And it's just fact. And so the fact that he's even giving Banner the glimpse into how someone thinks that gets out of that type of stage of life and say like, okay, no, this is how you actually elevate yourself. That is advice that if Banner wants to take it and wants to run with it, he could. Now, how did you feel about the fact that this actually turns into a great deal of fear in Banner?
I think it sets up perfectly what you're talking about. And actually, it was a great segue because you said it, he has a huge ego, Whitfield. He's looking for a wow, Mr. Whitfield, like, you're the man. Like, I get it. Thank you for showing me. And it has the complete opposite effect on Banner when he's talking to Clyde. But listen to this clip, because I think this clip is fantastic. Listen to the reaction that it actually has in Banner, which is the complete opposite, I think, of what Whitfield wanted it to elicit in him. But listen to Clyde's reaction to it, though, because I think Clyde gives the reaction that Whitfield was actually looking for. Let's take a listen to their speakeasy scene.
Whitfield can look at a mountain and see the gold deep inside it. He saw those Vikings sliding down the mountainside like otters, making fools of themselves. And he sees a business in it. Sees a fortune in it.
A man of vision.
It's no vision. He sees through us. Sees the greed in our hearts. I've never met a man who scares me. Not once in my life. Until now. The man scares me, Clyde. He fucking scares me to death.
Clyde's man of vision. As soon as you said that, I was thinking of Clyde saying man of vision, which is exactly what Whitfield wanted the reaction to be. Mm-hmm. Banner's reaction is, shit, he scares the shit out of me. He sees right through us and he drills down right to that weakness we have, that greed in our heart, which is how he got Banner initially. That is how he hooked Banner initially. He promised Banner money and then land and threw it at him all quickly and befuzzled him in his war with the Duttons. And now he's sitting here thinking and stewing on it, and he's having second thoughts because he is truly terrified. He boldly said to Ellie, his wife, last week, I would lay down with the devil if it meant protecting the future for my son. As he's sitting here in a speakeasy and the storm is raging outside, I wonder if he's actually so confident about that position.
Very much reminds me of, how the Great Train Robbery, how people when the train came to the screen, they ran out of the theater thinking the train was coming right at through.
Me. Terrifies me.
There's things about Banner that are like that. If you've not been exposed to a lot of different ideas and a lot of different experiences and a lot of things going on, there's a fair shot that your first initial feeling about anything that is new and outside of what you're accustomed to is fear. You're instantly thinking, this is the thing that's going to get me. Because if I don't understand it, I can't protect myself or my family from it. So when I have somebody like Whitfield in my orbit who is going to talk about these things that there's so many steps down the line from where I'm thinking, I'm instantly frightened. Whereas Clyde's a little bit of a different element here because he has been already actively acting on Whitfield's behalf in terms of undoing things and telling secrets and doing all this stuff. Banner, he's a little bit different. He has done things that are all connected to his own needs. Clyde's different. Clyde's actually working to actually break things down with the Duttons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But he's also
one
bought
has
the
got
hype.
like self-interest, and one is Clyde's really like still a henchman, over here.
Right, but Clyde's recitation without Whitfield being in earshot of A Man of Vision, he has bought the book and has read it and probably has it autographed.
Yes, and that's where I'm saying, like, he's steps ahead of Banner. Like, he's actively doing more now than I really think that Banner is, which is weird because that's not the way it looks on the surface. But when you start to hear their thought process and who's all in and who's actually frightened and who's kind of, maybe stepping back a little bit, this is a different dynamic than Clyde and Banner seem to have before.
Did you know that in Oklahoma there is a city called Anadarko, and that city is the county seat of the county of Cato, Oklahoma, in the southwest corner of Oklahoma? I did not until this episode.
Okay.
But it is. It historically was the seat of Native American affairs. Caroline, they self-title call themselves the Indian capital of the nation. Oh. Anadarko, Oklahoma has a museum dedicated to famous Native Americans. They have 2 Indian schools in it, including a boarding school and a day school. Anadarko, Oklahoma is an interesting place for us to see the Marshals and Father Renaud riding into in this episode, because it also happens to have a local office of the U.S. Marshal. Meet U.S. Marshal Mamie Fawcett.
Where are you in from?
Montana.
It's a long way from home.
Montana is my post. It is not my home. Is there a marshal present who does field work?
Just the one you're looking at.
You patrol this territory. Serving warrants, making arrests. Why do I find that hard to believe?
Because you're a bigot, living in the wrong century, Marshal. I doubt you traveled from Montana to question my ability to serve this badge. You need something. And if you have any hopes of getting it, you'll ask for it now before I throw you out of my office.
You mind that mouth, woman?
Mademoiselle, we seek a murderer who we believe has fled to the Comanche Nation.
Comanche only respect that badge if it respects them back. Many marshals found their way into a pine box learning that lesson. Tread lightly, Marshal. This is not Montana.
Clearly.
All right, Caroline, first impressions on U.S. Marshal Mamie Fawcett. What do you think?
Oh, I like her very much. I like how she spoke up right away and had no issue being blunt with Kent. I mean, I think he needs to be put in his place in a pretty major way. I loved that she sized him up right away and was like, what is it you want? And like, let's just do this. I didn't know if she was going to fully cooperate. I didn't know how this was going to fly. So I was actually pretty surprised that the priest spoke up and was more calm and level-headed and actually tried to work with her more. And I was really surprised at how quickly we were getting this sketch artist rendering of Tiona. And I was like, oh, crap, this is like too good of a drawing. I'm not feeling great about this. I was starting to feel very nervous because they are getting some traction on actually being able to find her.
When Marshal Fawcett says Esther is an accomplished sketch artist, she was not lying.
No.
Esther was doing a great job. I thought it was a little interesting that we kind of focused on it for so long, and as if I almost felt like kind of how we saw the lone cowboy last week, Cody Lore. Mm-hmm. I almost felt like maybe we were supposed to recognize Esther as a sketch artist that we know. I don't.
Maybe that we don't know, but maybe she's a real sketch artist. Obviously,
maybe. But so
unless you like have trading cards for like sketch artists that I don't know about.
No, like everyone else's stories, my mother threw my shoebox of sketch artist trading cards out when I was a kid.
Crap! When you went to college, shoot.
Yes, it's the worst. It's the worst. I could have paid for college with it.
Hate it.
So maybe
no, she was great, and maybe Esther, you're right. Maybe she is a real life sketch artist, and we were supposed to appreciate this skill set. But I'm scared for Tiona now. This is a new chunk, like a foothold, I want to say, that now these guys have where they can start putting this picture out, and this isn't just word of mouth or who they happen to come upon, you know, just wandering through a prairie somewhere. This is going to go up in towns and go up in places. And now we're going to get into some pretty major trouble. I just don't know how she's going to get out of this. If it's not age and it's not getting married and it's not being with her family, and how are we getting out of this?
So I think the interesting thing is, and thank goodness that they actually did not decide to pack up and head to the res at this very moment, because man, can you imagine? I mean, they're about 100 miles away according to the cowboy from last week, but I actually think they're a little bit more even. But going any closer to where things are down on the Washita River is not a good idea, man. I hope they stay in the Panhandle or head, you know, further west towards like New Mexico or something. But I think my takeaway from Marshall Fawcett is that she's someone who knows the Comanche people. She knows how to work among them. Unlike Kent, who just wants to shoot and threaten and do violence as a way of getting his point across, she seems like someone who would be much more successful with the carrot and the stick in order to work among the people to find, as they depict her, a ravenous serial killer of 5 people joined up with a vicious gang, which made me laugh the way these 3 strong men were describing Tiona, Runs His Horse, and Pete.
I felt like she showed the healthy amount of respect for the Comanche people in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. Right. You know, we haven't heard words that are like, you need to watch yourself. You need to be more cautious. You need to be more respectful of what these people are capable of. And absolutely how, you know, voraciously they're going to be protecting their own lives and their own land and everything. So don't just like be coming in here trying to kick us all around. Like, this is not the way it's going to fly here. I
can't imagine she would be, based on the little interaction we saw of her tonight, I can't imagine she would have been impressed with the actions from last week, with the open firing, killing the 3 men on horseback and running down the child. She doesn't strike me as someone who would have been very impressed with that, and maybe would have even actually had done something. So, but she also seems like someone who is dedicated to the law. She didn't seem completely convinced or sold by the story based on the picture and the story they were telling. They didn't seem to jive with her, was my feeling. But also, these are 2 lawmen and a priest coming to her and telling her the story. And she, respecting the law in addition to the Comanche people, is taking it seriously and doing the things that she needs to do to start the process. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I know there's trailers out there. I think there are trailers out there that show maybe she having interaction with Spencer. So, you know, we talked a little bit last week, Spencer and Tiona definitely being in the same geographical area before long. Yes. Sounds like U.S. Marshal Fawcett will be also, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in the coming episodes.
I have to tell you that some part of my heart really wanted her to like drag her feet or mess up the drawing or do something, because it's like I really didn't want her to be fully on board and be helpful to these guys. Like, I really wanted her to be a little bit slower. I don't know what's going to happen because we only have this small scene.
Right. All we've seen so far is her starting, or Esther starting the drawing. We actually haven't seen her do the promised photocopying and posting them yet. So, because they were standing right there and wanted some kind of action. So presumably they're not going to stay in that office until the posters start going up. So maybe there will be some investigation before the widespread.
I don't know how much investigating you could possibly do.
Well, she knows the people. I mean, she probably knows the Comanche group that they rode through and murdered and harassed the day before. Based on how she was talking of the Comanche people, seems like someone who can ride into that camp and maybe not be a friend, but not be a threat or an enemy to them, and maybe actually get them to talk.
She definitely seemed more level-headed all the way around. Like, she was willing to do investigative work and talk to people, as opposed to just intimidate and scream and, you know, draw a gun immediately.
I'm no expert on Native American affairs, but you know, but I surprise, I know. But, you know, Tiona and Runs His Horse and Pete, they're Crow. The people here are Comanche that we're talking about. I don't see that the Comanche people, beyond just being us against them, you know, us Native American people versus the white people, Native American tribes are pretty territorial, and I don't know how much they're going to put their own people at risk trying to protect 3 Crow from 1,000 miles away. If you go there with the right attitude, you may actually get help from the Comanche people, if nothing else, as a way to avoid more heartache coming to them.
any group is like that. I mean, nobody wants to bring the heat to their people,
Right.
So if there's something they can do to deflect,
Yeah.
any group of people would be likely to be like, well, I don't want this coming. I don't want people coming around here. Poking
Y'all go
around
watch
anymore.
American Primeval if you want to see groups not wanting to put out for each other. And we'll talk about murderous bloodbath.
The picture that made me think immediately of American Primeval, because immediately I went
to the wanted poster in that. Yeah.
The wanted poster, because the second you start seeing the wanted poster is when things are constantly starting to unravel. And I think that show actually is informing me about how I felt when I saw the sketch artist drawing. I immediately kind of drew back to that show and was like, as soon as you have a drawing, like this is going to get so much worse for her.
So a little bit of history that I was able to find. I couldn't find any record of Marshall Fawcett operating in the 1920s, but there are plenty of records, including a snippet from the Chicago Tribune in 1898, when Marshall Fawcett and another female marshal named S.M. Birch were both appointed as deputy marshals under the purview of U.S. Marshal C.H. Thompson. I believe the C stands for Canada H. Thompson, who was the United States Marshal for this Oklahoma territory. Fawcett and Birch were deputy marshals under him, but was significant because they were among the first female marshals appointed anywhere in the country, and did go out and didn't just do office work, though they did do office work, but they also did serve warrants, and they, went out and did some investigations too. So in 1898, for sure, the real Mamie Fawcett was out operating as a deputy marshal in the Oklahoma territories. I could not find any record beyond that to say what she did, or she ended up becoming the head of the Oklahoma territories herself, because I think Thompson retires in 1901 or leaves the post in 1901. So perhaps maybe she did get elevated to that, but there's a 26-year gap that I can't account for what actually happened to her. Nor could I find when she actually died, which I thought was interesting, that there is information about her out there, but I couldn't actually find a full biographical workup of her. So I'm curious if anyone knows out there, or if anyone is an expert on this area, I'm curious to know what actually went on to her. Was she actually the marshal in operation in the Southwest Oklahoma territories at this time? It's funny because this is the same time period, well, not now, but 40 years, when she was first appointed a deputy marshal. That was a little bit after the time that Bass Reeves, another spinoff tangentially related to Yellowstone show from a couple of years ago, he was also a marshal in this territory at that same time in the 1880s, which is a great show that I watched on a plane and I really enjoyed. So if you're looking for another Taylor Sheridan-esque show, go check out Bass Reeves. Let's fast forward to later that night. These grown men are camping in the woods, and we pick up with a discussion of Marshal Kent being disgusted by the idea of passing the Indian Citizenship Act, the idea that they would marry our women. Were you surprised at Father Renaud's positioning in this scene? Not only, I mean, he challenges him, on the idea that, oh, they're all your women now, but then he goes on to give facts about European history and the Moors and their architecture, and the fact that Black men have been marrying white women for hundreds of years without, I think he uses the word, without calamity.
Yeah.
It's a very progressive attitude for a guy that we have seen only really in a negative light. It was a little jarring for me, I'm not going to lie. I'm curious how you took Father Renaud in the scene versus the marshals.
It was pretty fascinating the way that he took up this idea that you should have this reward of being equal if you're willing to assimilate and willing to let go of your own culture and be a part of this culture that we want you to be a part of over here. Then you should have all the rights and responsibilities and everything of everybody else who's doing that. I was pretty surprised by that. It's reasonable, but there's just nothing about Father Renaud that has felt reasonable this whole time. So I'm like, wow, okay. The other thing we have to remember is he is a priest. So when he's being sort of like grossed out, like they're all your women, priests don't get married, guys. So, I mean, there's a whole portion here that's sort of like, you look at this and look at marriage and you're looking at this. The father is only looking at it from like the principle of being married, the principle of marrying another person, having a wife and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like you have to take what he's saying with like a grain of salt, because he's not living it. He's just saying in this esoteric way, if you assimilate, you should be able to get married. And he's talking about this in this very out there kind of way, because that's not his life. That's not what he's doing. So it's easy to talk to someone like Ken and be like, oh, you should be like above it and be cool with this. But he is also not married to anyone and doesn't know that whole life and what all that entails. So it was like having all this bluster for what you think is the right thing, but you also don't walk that walk at all.
I think it's interesting that he uses the word, if they agree to assimilate, they should be rewarded with equality. And I didn't see him doing the air quotes around equality, but I feel like he definitely should have been doing the air quotes. I think this is, remember we were talking about like degrees of evil last week? I feel like they're positioning Father Renaud as, he is definitely a bad guy in the scheme of how we understand these things, but his gray is not as dark as Marshall Kent in particular. I mean, just the way they begin to guffaw at him when he talks about like how the Moorish, architecture is magnificent in Andalusia. Like, they are guffawing.
You get why they're laughing. They're laughing because he's speaking of this in a very scholarly way, but he is not a married man. He is not a part of the society of married people. He doesn't know what he's talking about in that regard. So it's easy to laugh at him because it's like, you are talking about this scholarly academic concept of people assimilating and people getting along and being able to be rewarded and stuff. But that's not how society works, Father. And you're kind of just talking from the pulpit right now. You're not talking amongst the people. And that's where I got all those like tittering laughter of just like, you don't know what you're talking about. It's not how it actually works when the rubber meets the road.
I didn't take it they were laughing at him because he doesn't understand marriage in that way. I think they were laughing at him more because he sounded so highfalutin.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying he doesn't understand marriage. I'm saying he is talking like a scholar, talking about marriage. And if you are a married person, you're looking at this person and be like, don't explain marriage to us. Don't explain how people are going to look at these couples as equal because they're willing to give up their culture. That's not how real society works. And a lot of people say that about religious figures, like whomever it is. It's like, you are living in our same world, but you are not walking the same walk the rest of us are. You have a very different life, where you get to stand above us and tell us how we should have our marriages and our families, yet you're not married and don't have a family. So there's sort of this separation, where you can wax poetic about how you think it should work. But it's laughable because we all know that's not how society is actually working.
And I think there's also a little bit of hypocrisy at play here, too. And I think Kent calls him on this. The only good thing Kent does is that he calls Father Renaud on the graveyard filled with tons and tons of dead Native American girls. How can you have a straight face at all about the equality and living without calamities caused by the intermingling when you're out here slaughtering dozens of children? And the Father Renaud's entire reaction is those people deserved it because they didn't choose God, essentially. They rejected their natural evolution. But those that do choose their natural evolution, I love wholeheartedly and accept as people. I don't think that's how that's supposed to work. I think Jesus was saying that we're supposed to love everyone, whether they reject us or not.
And whatever their cultures are valid. They don't have to abandon their own culture and history in order to become equal. That's not how you're supposed to do it. And I think that's, again, why it's easy to kind of laugh at him and be like, you're just talking about this in this very idealistic kind of way when you've got, like you said, an entire graveyard full of children. And, all we need to do is ask God for forgiveness. There's sort of like a head patting that is going on with Father where you're like,
Even the way he says, well, it's true. And then takes his book and like huffs himself to start reading presumably the Bible. And the laughter continues until an arrow pierces Marshall Thomas's chest. And then the laughter quickly dies away.
Did that shock you or what?
It did shock me a little bit. And I can't say I was upset about it. I mean, I kind of wish it was, I don't know that we heard, other than when Thomas says in Marshall Fawcett's office, they're renegades, talking about Runs His Horse and Pete, that vicious gang. I don't know that we had really heard him speak at all. So, I wish it was Kent with the arrow out of his chest, but there we are, beggars and choosers, right? So
completely. And we're not ready to get rid of the baddies yet.
No. What did you think of, talk about unhinged bloodthirst moments when they emerge from the bush and they're just firing their guns at these warriors on horseback. And Renaud just starts screaming as the clip is just empty. It's just clicking dry, and he's just screaming until he collects himself. And then you see a little bit of a horrified look on his face when he sees that it was essentially a small child that he had just murdered and shot to death. I don't know how to take that. You can't have it both ways to me, Father Renaud. You can't be screaming from the bushes, firing your gun, and then look horrified at the consequences of your actions.
But isn't that just what we were just talking about? The concept that he thinks he's like above this crap. And the reality is that he's not living in the real world. And here he is finally having a gun in his hand, having to actually do it. And then he's taken aback by how horrible it all is. It's like you just explained to us about how these people need to assimilate and you don't even care and they need to be doing this and they need to be doing that. And now you have to actually be the one to pull the trigger. And now, it's disgusting. And like, that's kind of the point of like what I was saying of like, he lives in this idealist type of world where he doesn't have to get his hands dirty like this. And when he does, he's actually freaked out. He's
like someone who looks at the gun and asks and yells at it, "What did you do?" when his hand on the trigger.
And you're like, you're the one, dude. And you're the one who's just yakking about how this is all fine and this is all great and we need to be doing this.
And yet Kent still winds up somehow the worst in the scene because he sasses at Father Renaud, "Don't worry, you just have to ask forgiveness." And then cold-bloodedly shoots one of them who's like crawling away, dead in the head. As bad as Father Renaud is, as hypocritical as he is, I gotta tell you, Kent keeps picking up the trophy as the worst guy in the scene.
I think the hypocrite is worse in the scene. I think if you're Kent and you walk the walk and talk the talk and actually do what you say you're going to do and own it, not give the ask forgiveness or I have my reasons or we need to be doing that. No, dude, you killed somebody. You have an entire graveyard full of children. Stop acting like you're better than the rest of us.
Oh, well, that's true. That's the only thing I like Kent for is that he won't let him forget that churchyard. But I also feel like
Kent, times in 2 episodes.
I feel like Kent though is almost justifying his actions because of that though, which doesn't work for me.
Oh, but these would have been his actions regardless.
Yes, but he's not portraying it that way, though. He's not portraying it that way. He's saying to the priest, "Don't act so shocked with me. I've seen your graveyard," which is fair, but also that's still not a validation. I mean, the two wrongs don't make a right. His graveyard full of dead children isn't a justification for you to just be willy-nilly murdering everyone.
Well, okay, hold on. They just got attacked. He wasn't willy-nilly murdering people. They were laying there quietly, and his friend just got killed. So this wasn't willy-nilly. They didn't just run into someone's house and start killing someone.
I think this was very much retribution for what they had just done the day before.
Oh, I completely agree. But,
right.
But
so
I'm
yeah, I
don't
think it was willy-nilly. I think they
you
brought
used
this
the word
on.
willy-nilly.
I think this was he was murdering willy-nilly, which he had started. He began this the day before with the willy-nilly killing in the Comanche.
It was willy-nilly killing for sure. But what I'm saying
this is a continuation of that. I don't think they weren't innocently sleeping in the woods.
Well, they were in the sense of like they were snuck up on in that regard. So their knee-jerk reaction to just start shooting into the darkness, what the hell else choice did they have? Were they just supposed to sit there and get killed? Like, I mean, there was no choice but to start shooting into the darkness. And you can't let anyone live. Because you know what that guy who's crawling away is going to go do? Get more friends.
Well, I think that's going to happen anyway when they don't come back, so...
You can't let them live. You know you can't. We've all seen enough movies and shows to know you can't let them crawl away.
Let's head to the stormy seas of the transatlantic crossing. We're going to play Alex's little clip here because the calm of her letter to Spencer about wanting to start her journey, how she has started her journey and just wanting to make an army of little Spencers, juxtaposed over the montage of the screaming and the vomiting and the being visual. Tossed to and fro, and just a close up on her face of terror. This is how her mission, this is how her voyage is starting. We haven't even gotten to the violence yet. This is just nature.
The puke with the seawater, shut up. I'm like, thank God I got a top bunk is all I'd be thinking.
I edited out as best I could, or edited around the screaming as much as I could in this clip.
I appreciate that.
Let's take a listen to Alex's one contribution in this episode.
Dear Spencer,
I have begun my journey to find you, to bring you the life growing inside me, the child that shall bear your name. I thirst for the moment I look in your eyes and you pull me close, and we make another, and another, a little army of us. This is the dream that fuels me to you. It is my only thought, my only desire. Your eyes upon me, your arms around me, and our bodies pressed together as if they are one.
I did want to go back real quickly, only because I forgot to say it. The Indian Citizenship Act was passed in June of 1924, and as we hear Kent say, it granted U.S. citizenship to all indigenous persons born in the United States. Because under the 14th Amendment, while it says people born in the United States are citizens, there is language in there that kind of it was taken to, if you weren't except for people not subject to the laws of the United States. So it had been interpreted prior to the passage of this act that the people living on the reservations, being their own nations, were not necessarily subject to the United States, even though they were born within the United States. And so there was always a question of whether or not they were citizens. This act made that explicitly clear that if you were born in the United States, even if you were born on a reservation, if you were an indigenous person, you were now deemed a citizen of these United States. This act was passed in June of 1924. So sorry, Kent. Maybe you won't even be alive to see when this actually comes to fruition, but at least you know it was on the docket. I don't know what to make of Alex. I think this was good cinematography, the horror we were watching versus the very calm voice.
And not just calm, but like hoity-toity accented voice in the middle of this complete mess.
Just baby after baby. That was the whole...
It kind of made you feel like she's having like almost some sort of disassociation from what her actual life is, because this is a scene. The only thing I kept thinking, and I know I said this in the last episode, was could you have made worse decisions here that you are ending up in this spot after you've counseled Jennifer like, oh, I don't want to be in too fancy of a place. And it's like, oh, girl.
Now you're on the part of the ship that's getting all of the water on board.
And the barf and the screaming. And can you imagine there's probably so many bodily fluids in that water. Like, this is so horrible. And this woman is, we think, pregnant. She's supposed to survive down here in this pit of despair down here. Again, Titanic flashbacks. I was like, oh my God, this is
without
horrible.
The fun Irish jigging that they did down in steerage in Titanic.
I really appreciated, though, I'm glad you picked up on the exact same thing that I did, and I hope that all of our listeners did too. It was very well made. That scene was very well done. The voiceover with such a proper accent and all this fantasy
and love
talk,
and fantasy talk. Yes,
total fantasy talk in the middle of this disgusting scene.
Julia Schlafer, give her credit, man. She is selling. Her body language is selling the scene. She has nothing but pure terror on her face, as do all the other background actors in this scene. And the way she's bracing the bulkhead and the bed and kind of trying to keep herself, and then the camera at the very last zooms in above her on her face, and it was
very well done.
Yeah, it's
very
great.
Well done.
It's a great juxtaposition.
I'm giving them a lot of credit for camera work and just for how they composed that entire shot. Everything from the audio to the visual to everything that was going on. All I could think was like, Alex, you have made a series of very unfortunate decisions.
Meanwhile, her beloved is pulling up on a dinghy, offloading some very suspicious crates under a pier with Luca, delivering him to Luca's cousin, Salvatore Matteo. Seems totally legit down in the free state of Galveston. Could not be having in a very sunny weather. It looked lovely down there compared to what Alex is going through. You could not have different circumstances. Alex was not eating freshly made brick oven pizza. Unlike Spencer was in this episode. Too.
And staying at the Galvez, I was like, ooh la la.
Did you like that Galvez was mentioned and Salvatore Matteo?
I stayed at the Galvez. It's still there. You can go anytime you want.
It's now called the Grand Galvez. It was the Hotel Galvez in the 1920s. It actually opened in 1911. And Salvatore Matteo did in fact lived for a time in the penthouse of the hotel.
And we don't call it the Grand Galvez. We just call it the Galvez. Here.
Yes, but the website calls it the Grand Galvez,
and
it used to be the hotel.
People know who show up here in Houston and Galveston. Don't start calling it the Grand Galvez. Just call it the Galvez.
I could also tell you the Galvez Bar and Grill is a restaurant and bar in Galveston located inside the hotel. Their phone number is 409-515-2145 if you want to go make reservations at the Bar and Grill inside the Grand Galvez. So
Hilarious.
there you go.
Like mention Pod Clubhouse for
yeah,
no
mention
discount
Pod Clubhouse
at all.
for no discount, but at least it'll make someone laugh.
Yeah, it will, definitely. So Spencer here, he has made some strange choices. I don't understand why he threw away this relationship and disrespected these guys. I don't get it. I do not see the motivation here. I don't know why he acted like this. It was so impulsive and foolish.
It was so impulsive and foolish, but you have to frame it, though, with the beginning of Trouble, and it really makes it seem like he's really just talking bullshit when he says that Trouble just keeps finding him. Let's listen to, this is how he starts this conversation, which then all of his actions after this seem to run contrary to it.
Lucas says, we like to fight.
I wouldn't say that.
What would you say then?
I guess I'd say I keep running into people looking for trouble, and they all think trouble is me.
I suffer the same predicament. But you also say you saved his life.
Yeah, well, he ran into one of those people. You know what I mean?
They're everywhere, those people.
Yes, they are.
Perfect. You have done a good deed by Luca. This guy understands you. You are talking the same language. I agree with you. You are a person of the world, Spencer. You have to understand these people exist here who are going to take it as the highest sign of disrespect. Now, I get Spencer Dutton is not someone who wants to be told he can't go and do what he wants to do. And Angelo makes a fatal flaw, standing in front of him, not getting out of his way. Poor decisions were made by everyone, but this was a blunder by Spencer, and honestly, kind of earned the ass kicking that he gets on that causeway in the middle of the night.
I felt terrible for him, but also I agree with you. You messed up, and I don't quite understand why he completely lost himself there. And maybe that's what we're supposed to understand as the audience member. This is not the level-headed Spencer that we've met in other scenarios where he's had to speak to people many, many pay grades above him, how he very deftly, got through a lot of different negotiations and situations with different people that we've seen him in season 1. This time, I felt like he was just, I'm going to go with like massively overtired and just sort of like, I don't know, just pissed and just like he felt disrespected on his own level. But still, given all of those factors, I still frowned at him so hard. I was like, this is stupid. I was so excited last episode to say, this is such a great door that's opening for him. He's going to have some resources. He's going to have some actual people who have his back. To turn and screw that up immediately felt like, God, Spencer.
It's almost as if his ancestor was speaking to him when she was talking about having no direction and no compass to guide movement or reason. I think it turns out maybe it wasn't about Jacob trying to get out in the storm, which was a horrible decision. Maybe it was, in fact, about Spencer acting a damn fool down in the mob-controlled Galveston, free city of Galveston, which we're going to talk about in a second. But in the end, Spencer, I think, redeems himself with Mr. Maceo because he speaks so passionately about why he acted the way he acted. Now, while it doesn't, I don't think, completely erase the disrespect, it still lands him in a position to potentially get what he wants, but it's going to cost him some crime, which, let's be honest, it was probably always going to require him to do some crime. Right. We even joked last week about how funny would it be if the Yellowstone turns into a bootlegging operation in the north for the Macheos as a way of making money to solve some of their economic problems, which I'm still not taking off the board. And this episode, the way it plays out,
something's got to happen.
He's getting to keep the truck if they can successfully get the bootlegging to Fort Worth. But let's listen to how Spencer brings Macheo back around to him.
Who's looking for trouble now? Gave you food, the finest suite in the finest hotel in the city. Had planned for you a splendid night, only to show you gratitude. Look how you repay my hospitality.
I never asked for it, and I don't want it. I am needed in Montana. My family is in danger. My wife is lost to me, and I don't have time for hospitality.
Yes, a lion hunter leaves Africa for America to hunt men instead. For your family, huh? That's what Lucas says.
It's a war over land. My family's land. And they're losing it.
I know that war. My family already lost it. Angelo seemed to be worried about trusting you. If I was Angelo, I wouldn't trust you either, judging by his face. But a man with a cause can always be trusted to do the very thing that helps his cause. I'm going to give that thing to you. You think you have time to discuss that?
Yeah, I got time for that.
So I think Spencer does a good thing here by explaining he wasn't turning down the hospitality because of who Maceo was, but because of the overriding urgency to get home to his family, which, as luck would have it, is a language and a topic upon which Salvatore Maceo understands and empathizes. So he actually talks himself out of the hole with such passion about why he needs to get there. But still, I agree with you. Total social blunder, especially with Southern hospitality as I have come to understand it. I can imagine how offensive this would have been, especially to a man who thinks highly of himself in his place of power and prestige, as Salvatore Maceo and his brother Rosario, who we do not see in this episode, I don't think. This is the height of their power at this time. Maximum offense given here.
You have no idea how much head shaking I was doing during this whole part because I understand. I really do get it. Me and you have been in this position, as silly of a thing as a podcast, where you are like, you want to get something completed and you want to get it done. And when people are talking about like, let's have a snack and let's like eat and talk and have hospitality, there is like an irritation about that where you're like, I've got work to do and like, I don't have time for this. I get that. But at the same time, again, he's been around enough cultured people and enough worldly experiences that he should have been able to play this more coolly than this. All I can say is that as an audience member, we're supposed to be picking up that he is at the end of his own rope and that all of his nerves are frayed because this isn't the way that he could really handle this. He's handling it in a way that is like, he's so exhausted and so out of it and just so can't even anymore that now we're ending up with this result. This shouldn't have been this way.
No, and how embarrassing for Luca, too.
Yes.
Especially given what Luca just went through. Like, he thought they had this whole kind of arrangement and understanding. And look, I brought this guy to you and they were talking in Italian. And then, you know, which the only thing I picked up was when he told Angelo to take him to eat. But yeah, how embarrassing for Luca, though. Salvatore must have been like, this jabroni motherfucker that you brought. Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
What do we think of this plan? You think this is going to go smoothly? He gives him cash and a gun for the two different kinds of cops he may encounter.
I like the way he said that, for the ones that take bribes and for the ones that don't.
I thought it was very really funny too.
That was clever writing.
So we're going to get, you know the route better than me. We're going Galveston to Fort Worth, probably on not the best paved roads, but probably some kind of formal road system in the Vidori seafood truck. What's the time frame on that bootlegging trip?
I mean, now it would probably take about 5 hours.
So let's say 10.
I mean, probably more than that, because I mean, we're going, 80 on the highway, and I don't think there's going to be nice highway to be doing. So yeah, no, I'm much more than that. I mean, I think this is going to take days and days and days, but I'm hopeful for them. And we know that Fort Worth is a city that's busy and bustling. We've seen it in 1883. So we know there's stuff going on in the stockyards and everything going on there. So who knows? I think I
believe 1923 did film in the stockyards early on in the season 2 production.
I believe they did too.
Interesting. So part of the deal is that once they're successful, interesting that Salvatore would not shake his hand, said that when you come back and next time we see each other, I'll shake your hand. I thought that was a little bit of a red flag for me.
Well,
there's a little bit of this is like
right
Sonny
now.
At the toll booth getting taken out, violent style.
I don't know. It felt to me like he needs to earn that handshake. Spencer was rude. He doesn't get the respect that he would have gotten had he just acted right. And so, I don't know. I say you do have to earn that handshake. So I'm okay with him holding back.
So if things go well, they deliver the Vidori seafood truck and the bootleg booze in it to Fort Worth. The plan is to send Luca back to Galveston on the train with the money, and Spencer gets to keep the truck. This is the arrangement, right? This is how a man with a cause can be trusted, because I'm going to give him exactly what he needs, and he'll have time for that conversation. So that's the plan. Let's see if it plays out that way, and hopefully it doesn't take us episodes and episodes to do this trip from Galveston to Fort Worth. I want to talk a little bit about, if you will indulge me for a little bit of history. About the Free State of Galveston, which I had never heard that phrase before, but you actually see it written on the wall when they're unloading the boat in the beginning of that scene under the pier. As they're walking up the beach under the pier to the left, you see Free State of Galveston written there. It's, as from my research, a satirical name given to Galveston during the early 1900s. During the 20s, Galveston Island emerged as a popular resort town, attracting celebrities from around the country. Gambling, illegal liquor, and other vice-oriented businesses were a major part of the tourism. The Free State moniker embodied a belief held by many locals that Galveston was beyond what they perceived as repressive mores of the laws of Texas and the United States. Two major figures of the era were the businessmen, power brokers, and crime bosses, Sam Salvatore and Rosario Macheo, who ran the chief casinos and clubs on the island and were heavily involved in local politics and the tourism industry. It is sometimes referred to as the open era or the wide open era because the business owners and the community made very little effort to hide their illegal activities. The tourist industry spawned by the illegal businesses helped to offset Galveston's decline as a commercial and shipping center following a devastating hurricane in 1900. Later on, though, by the 1950s, there was a crackdown. The Galveston open freewheeling time came to an end, and the economy stagnated for a long time in Galveston after that. However, the Hollywood Dinner Club, which is where Spencer, if he had had manners, was supposed to have dinner this night, was in fact a real place. It was opened by the Macheos. It was the most elegant nightclub on the Gulf Coast for when it did open. The club featured crystal chandeliers, a large dance floor, and air conditioning, which was a new technology at the time. And the Hollywood was the first club in the nation to use it. Because of Salvatore Macheo's smooth personality, he was the brains and Rosario was the muscle, from how it seems. He became the face of the nightclub. Guy Lombardo used to perform the club's opening, and Sam attracted a steady stream of celebrity performers thereafter. The club hosted one of the nation's first remote radio broadcasts and featured Ben Burney's orchestra, which was introduced by a young Walter Cronkite. The club, the first venue in the nation to offer high-class gaming, dining, entertainment, and air conditioning under one roof, was unique at the time. So it was a real institution, the Hollywood Dinner Club, which we did not get to see tonight because Spencer is rude. A little bit about a little bit about the Macheos. So they emigrated from Palermo, Sicily, to Louisiana in 1901. They were originally trained, the two brothers were trained as barbers. They moved to Galveston shortly before World War I to start their business. Once Prohibition took hold, the brothers began to give their customers gifts of low-quality wine, which they were able to smuggle. As their customers became more interested in the liquor, the Macheos gradually became more serious bootleggers. They allied themselves with the Beach Gang, opened a cold drink place, otherwise known as a speakeasy, and invested in the gang's gambling operations. They would eventually overtake the Beach Gang and make it the basis of their organization. So they were kind of mentored by the two guys who ran the Beach Gang and then essentially supplanted them and consolidated power in all of Galveston. One last fun fact about this before we move on. Rosario Macheo would go on to marry Francis Despensa. Okay? Doesn't mean anything to us. Except the actor who's playing Luca, his name is Andy, you guessed it, Despensa.
Wild, huh?
I'm sure they are not related.
But it would be awesome if they were.
But how funny if Luca was in fact, the guy who playing Luca was in fact related to his cousin's wife on the show.
That would be kind of fabulous. I would love that.
So I know Galveston now is a big port town. It's a lot of the cruise ships in Texas leave out of Galveston. That's what I know of it. What's Galveston
a lot
today?
Of the cruise ships. It's not like a bustling Miami type port like that. I mean, we have a couple of cruise lines that come out of there, but it's pretty small.
If you're leaving out of Texas, I think you're only leaving out of Galveston from when I've looked at cruise. Yeah.
There's no other. I don't know where you're going. Yeah, no, for sure. But is this my experience overall with Galveston? I mean, Galveston is a great place. It's not like this huge resort town that you might imagine. I mean, when you think like of these, like, you know, there's only a handful of big fancy hotels. And I mean like on one hand. It is not like this massive luxury type place. Now, again, the flood that they're talking about, the Great Storm of 1900, that's huge. That's a huge, huge, devastating hurricane that is still talked about now. I mean, this long ago. Wild. Yeah, no, it's huge. And definitely if anyone gets a chance to go, I mean, there's lots of stuff to see and historical things to see there. I love the Strand. That's where I totally love go shopping there and stuff. There's lots of neat things to see and great food and all that good stuff. But this heyday that they're talking about, not quite the same. It's much more of a, I don't know. It's not a white sand kind of resort place. It's on the Gulf. We get like the muddy water. We don't get like the bright, beautiful blue water or any of that kind of stuff. So it sounds fascinating back then, but it's definitely a sleepier place now, I would say overall. Now, are there like gigantic things? Do they have Mardi Gras stuff down there? Yes. Do they have like Biker Week and stuff? Yes. Jeep Week? Yes. There's definitely, I mean, people would argue with me that, you know, it is still very busy and populated. Surely, yes, it is. But it's not this heyday kind of talk.
Well, hopefully everything goes well with the bootlegging and maybe we'll get to see Galveston again. Who knows?
I think we will, because I know my brother and sister-in-law were actually down there when they were filming and was staying down there at the hotels and saw like lots of stuff going on. So I'm really very hopeful we do get to see more Galveston.
Well, let's head north to Bozeman as we finish up this episode's discussion. Last week, we heard Jacob and Sheriff McDowell talking about the judge being in charge of the case, Judge Garrett. We get to meet Judge Garrett in this episode, and because he is resistant to Jacob's charms of why he should release Zane and Alice and the kids all into the Duttons' care, which, pat on our back, we guessed was the way this was going to shake out.
Well, we definitely hoped for all of their sake, although we didn't know about Alice. So I'm still
right. I mean,
I
did. Yeah, definitely. I didn't think. Yeah, I didn't think we were going to get Alice back because it seemed too good to be true that we would.
It did.
But you know, also they're all still stuck in a snow embankment right now, and Zane's not in great shape. So who knows? At least as right now, at least they got out of Bozeman anyway, all together as a family. But let's listen to how Sheriff McDowell and Jacob are able to get Judge Garrett to come around, which I want to give you a hat tip to, because they say something here that you talked about specifically in last week's episode.
You've known me for a long time, Roy. This is about as far as I care to be pushed.
Threatening the judge, Jake?
Threats have a level of uncertainty that comes with them.
I don't make the laws of this land. I preside over the consequences of their violation.
You're married to a Crow woman. 2 states over, that law applies to you. And you're the one being judged.
Guess it's a good thing I live in Montana.
We'll tell you the name of the preacher when you give us the name of your liquor contact. How does that sound?
You know, Roy, maybe we ought to wander on over to my office and have a little chat about this.
This is blackmail. You think you won something? You haven't won a thing.
There ain't no winner among us on this deal, Roy. Not one.
Caroline called it last week. Ain't no winner among us, right? Everything in this show seems to always play just to the middle. Everyone unhappy all the time. No one wins in this show.
I think that this has been the theme the entire time. All the way back from 1883, we have heard this same lament from everybody, which is no matter how hard we work and no matter how much we do, at the end of the day, there's always so much sacrifice that has to happen that it's really ever hard to feel like you won. It was a win to get Zane and Alice and the children back. But then when you look at Zane and you see him in that bed, just practically catatonic, unable to walk, not able, you could see he never said these words, But you could see the wheels turning where when he says, I can't walk, it's the rest of that sentence is, I can't work.
Right.
I can't be a ranch hand anymore. I can't earn a living. Like, he doesn't say all those words, but that's what's going on with this poor man. And he is just catatonic is like the best way that I could really describe the way that his face looked and his eyes.
Oh, the way he was just
everything.
staring at the ceiling, even when they started talking to him. I don't even know that he blinked. Brian Garrity, who plays him, I think just knocked it out of the park in the scene because, man, Zane was in work. I had imagined him being in bad shape, and he was actually in far worse shape than I had even imagined in my head.
I had no idea he couldn't walk or stand.
Well, they had said because Sheriff McDowell had said that they had him up walking the halls in last week's episode. That seems to be a gross exaggeration of actually where he is. He even says that no one's even come and like tried to diagnose him. It's almost like they have him in some kind of sanitarium more than the hospital, but they're in Gallatin County Hospital. But they seem to just be doing palliative care, maybe more than anything else.
If you think about it, I mean, he has broken the law. So I guess, I mean, it's like he's not getting care because he's also a bad guy as far as they're all concerned. So, there's that part too. But this just feels like even when you gather Zane and Alice and the children and you bring them all back to the ranch, which let's just hope we make it there because like you said, we're not there yet. It doesn't feel like a win. I mean, they're out of their home. Think of the last time we saw them in the shower and loving on each other and the kids and the sweetness around the table and talking about how radios work and all this stuff like that. They have lost that life. Like that's done for them. So it doesn't, it's a patch here to say, okay, they can come and live at the ranch and basically be, unfortunately, like 4 more mouths to feed with kind of not that much of like good working hands and bodies that can really do anything. I don't really know how this is going to work out. If I'm Kara, I'm like, you just brought back 4 more people. And none of these people can help or do anything. Like,
I don't know, though. I feel like this was a very Dutton thing to do, though. Even if they if they can't work.
It's the practicality, though. We got to go back to the no winning.
That's
true. You're using your heart. I'm using my head. These are people who, yes, we love them. Yes, they are part of the ranch family. Yes, they belong to go back to the Duttons. But just the practicality of like, we are basically eating, just liquid soup kind of with a little kind of flavoring in it and stuff like, and now you're bringing 4 more people here. I wish in some way that they could go and have like ransacked their home and gotten some supplies and be able to like bring some stuff too. But it's like the way that this is all going to go down, oh my gosh, they're already all living so feebly that I just feel like it's like, oh, I just don't know how this is going to go.
I thought the interesting conversation was, and it was the most lucid and checked in that Zane was talking about why do they even care? They've never cared before. They've always left us alone. And Jacob having to tell him that it's Whitfield and Whitfield made them care. And Zane says they're chopping us down one by one. And Jacob says, of course, he says the refrain that him and Kara say every episode, it seems, is come spring, we'll start doing chopping of our own, which, yeah, man, get hype. I'm here for it. But Zane, who is broken and barely coherent, is the one that has to say, if there's any of us left. And he's 1,000% right. And also, man, can we put more pressure on Spring, which is code name for Spencer? I mean, Spring is an inanimate object. It is a season. You're talking about Spencer. Come Spencer, they'll do chopping of their own. That is so much pressure to put on this guy who can't even be nice to the mobsters.
What we discussed was like, how much can Spencer bring to the table?
Well, I think he can do chopping. I think that's about it. This actually was, I think, a great support of the discussion last week of they're not thinking of the big picture of the economics and the brains. They're still looking at Spencer purely as the tool by which they will exact their vengeance.
I don't know if it's enough vengeance to get back.
Maybe Luca
track.
comes north with him. Maybe Luca, because remember how he swindled 20% out of the fight winnings. Maybe Luca needs to take a little trip north, and we can get. I don't know. Were there any paisans in modern day that was that maybe were descendants of Luca Maceo?
I don't remember any, but maybe we'll have to go back and think harder and see if we see any around. But I don't remember any, and I don't know if Luca and that whole world has a place up in Montana or not. I'm not feeling it, but I don't know. I definitely feel like you're right. The pressure on Spencer is insane. And whatever he's supposed to do when he gets her, I wish that we started to have a little bit more conversation about so what are we going to do when he gets here?
Another mouth to feed along the conversation of.
Exactly.
And he's a big Jack guy. He's going to require some carbs.
And he's bringing a wife who's supposedly pregnant and all this other stuff too. So more mouths. And
now he's got a hankering for pizza.
No skills. Yeah. Right. Although he just had one bite, I was like, dude, at least stuff it in your pocket. That's the good thing about pizza.
How funny the little pantomime about he goes to have the fork with the pizza and the man has to describe to fold it over.
Show.
I thought that
but
was
then
very,
when he
very
does
funny.
it and he kind of flips it where the toppings are on the bottom, I was like, you're ruining this pizza.
I mean, it's a pretty self-explanatory thing. I don't understand how he fucked it up so bad.
Sandwiches are pretty common. It seems like you could have picked it up and figured that out.
So in the other great example of Elsa's voiceover from the beginning of the episode about no direction, no compass to guide movement or reason, I get not wanting to stay another day in Bozeman. Nothing good is happening in Bozeman. But this storm is a horrible idea. This was exactly what Kara warned him about doing. And he takes them into the embrace of a blizzard that is a blizzard to end all blizzards. I mean, people joke in mainline Yellowstone, it never snowed ever in mainline Yellowstone in the show. And people would joke that it is never dead of winter. It seems to only ever be dead of winter in 1883 and 1923.
What do you make of that? You think, is that some sort of commentary on climate change, or did they really just never film during a part where it was snowing?
Well, I think there were the logistics of they never wanted to film because it would have been so much more expensive to film in the wintertime at Yellowstone. Yeah. I think that's why they always shut it down. But why did they then decide to do it for these shows? I don't know. But
I think because you got to show this massive desperation.
I think that's
really
why. I think we're still in the building of the empire instead of.
Riddle me this one, though. Why did we not bring the covered wagon? I do not understand that for even one friggin' second.
I mean, this is what Jack is lamenting. He's like, I should have brought the covered wagon.
But
maybe
dude,
he couldn't.
Maybe
he couldn't fit the chaps. Maybe he couldn't fit the chaps in the covered wagon.
Wouldn't get in there. Maybe, but here's the thing. I am just you know your goal is to bring back children and an injured man, and a woman. And a storm is coming and you don't bring the covered wagon. You basically brought the convertible to do this.
So, and the convertible, the last time you brought the convertible, your father was murdered, as was your father-in-law. The open covered wagon, not a great idea, Jack. Stop fucking bringing it every places.
Not a good idea.
Let's talk about where we leave them, because that's where we're down to the last two. Where are we leaving people? So we leave Jacob and Jack and the Davises, flip the wagon, which guys, to flip the wagon also required putting this family in the snow. Before you shuffled them under the wagon, once you flip it, you had to go place Alice and the two little children and comatose Zane on the ground in the blizzard. It's just a bad idea all around. And they have to let all the horses go. So even when the storm passes, they have no horses to get back.
And I want to think when you try to flip that thing back over, I bet you it's not fully intact.
And also going to weigh 4 times as much with all the snow on it. That was a thick snow falling. It wasn't like a light snow.
This is a scene, you guys. This is a big, big mess.
The very final scene, and as Elsa gives us our final voiceover, which I'm going to play here in a second, Kara hears a commotion. She hears a scream, which I thought initially was Elizabeth screaming. It was not. She goes downstairs. There's snow everywhere blowing inside the house.
Wasn't that crazy?
Crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Did you have a moment where you're before I saw the dead nurse?
I was so confused by what was happening.
Is this a dream sequence? Is this a nightmare? Is this because it was so surreal? There were several doors open.
Yeah.
There was one way over on the left side of the screen. Then this other door is obviously broken. All this snow everywhere. The dead nurse, everything, it looked like we were literally having some sort of insane nightmare moment.
When I saw her on the ground and then with the bloody muzzle, it was still the same kind of bloody muzzle. It really felt like one of those kinds of dreams that Casey would have in the original show about the wolf. Remember, he eventually actually has a really significant one about where he realizes he's going to have to choose his family or the ranch, right? I mean, those got pretty intense, and those were dream sequences. You're 1,000% right. This felt like a nightmare dream sequence.
It was so weird. And honestly, it wasn't until the dead nurse that I was like, is there actually like...
And that's not how wolves are. My understanding, wolves do not act like this to humans. They don't hunt humans. They don't break into houses like thieves.
But they're desperate. This is the point,
Or they're rabid.
This is massive. Yes, but I mean, but regardless, it doesn't matter if it's just they're hungry or they're rabid.
Right.
It doesn't matter. There's a desperation hunting that is happening of the Duttons right now. I mean, we're talking about picking them off by individuals like Whitfield. We're getting picked off by nature, you know?
And the episode ends with the wolf who climbs up on the table first, snarling at Kara. She aims the gun. The wolf lunges. Kara screams. The gun goes off as we pull outside. We see the flash of the gun go off, and we don't know what happens. I hope Spade is in the house. I hope he didn't go back to the bunkhouse, though he probably did. I don't know where we're going to pick up for, what was episode 3 called? I said it last week. Wrap Thee in Terror.
These are tough episodes, man. We have got some massive peril going on. For
episode 4 is going to be called Sunshine and Puppies, hopefully.
Oh my gosh. Every single one of our characters, though, is in a whole mess. And I mean, even our villains are having a hard time, you know? I mean, we've got everybody struggling right now. So this was a tough one. I liked this episode better than I liked episode 1. What did you think of those two compared?
I like this one because it felt like it kind of got down to business, and it felt like we were getting stakes. I do feel like there's a little bit of treading water, but we moved it forward. We understand now this plan for Whitfield and Banner makes more sense because it also is a direct line to a storyline that we have seen before for fans of the Yellowstone universe. It also makes sense economically to attack everything from this point of view and make it commercial tourism, to kill ranching as a quote unquote peasant toiling business. The lion and now the wolf and the attack, the constant attack from nature on the ranch in addition to man, everything is attacking the ranch now. We knew man was attacking the ranch with man things and taxes and laws, but now nature is literally attacking it. The snow is coming inside. The wolf is coming inside. All of the hens are dead. Those couple of eggs they have left in the icebox. There was a little bit of levity when Kara goes to the ice outhouse to cut off the meat and get some veggies and stuff, and she's lamenting wanting an icebox in the house, which we talked about last week, and technology and progress. But, you know, nature is literally invading the last sanctuary that they have.
I just don't know how they're going to pull this all back together. I mean, this is insane, you know, what is going on right now. And honestly, I mean, leaving us on that moment of just like Kara and the screaming and the everything that's oh my gosh. I mean, I've really not worried about Jacob and Kara in terms of like their
making it out of the season.
Well, their capabilities of fighting against this, like they've been doing it for so long that there's sort of this like unspoken, like, yeah, but they'll figure it out. You know, like they pull it out in the end. Like they're totally going to do it. But this is like, boy, are they stacking the deck against them.
The luck is going to run out at some point. You can't die. It's like Final Destination. This is a little bit of Final Destination. You can only outrun it for so long. Eventually it catches up to you, and it's starting to feel like that. Let's listen to Elsa. She takes us out because she really summarized her intro and outro voiceovers were really good bookends. And it was kind of hitting on the same theme as the first episode. Winter is here and it is actively trying to kill you. And now everything is trying to kill you, not just winter. So let's listen to this voiceover that takes us out, literally takes us up to the moment where the wolf lunges at Kara and she fires the gun.
Hell is described as rivers of fire and canyons of coal and ash. Perhaps it is taught that way because the people of Palestine and Israel cannot comprehend the merciless, loveless nature of cold. To the mountain people, hell is a river frozen, with canyon walls of ice and bitter air that ruptures lungs and rapes your sanity. Hell is winter, and winter is here to ravage all of us.
Rapes your sanity and ravages all of us. Good Lord, Elsa, you died under a sunny tree with a bird. Pretty bird.
This is really a insane concept to try to wrap my brain around, like how people survived all this, how people made it through. We talked a lot about in 1883, like the life expectancy was like so low. And like when you're looking at this, there's so much of it where you can understand, like, man, just the toil, the physical toil of having to build everything, make everything yourself, having to do everything. But I don't think people talk so much about the emotional and the mental thrashing that these people are taking every single second of dealing with this. It's almost more than like a human psyche can bear to see this amount of like destruction and attacks and just nature being so ready to turn its back on you. Like, it is not this loving mother nature kind of feel like, oh, we're going to be out in the sunshine. It's like painful.
And maybe listening to Elsa talk, and as she's this character coming over from 1883, if you guys listen to our 1883 podcast or watch 1883, a lot of Elsa's voiceovers, which were always in 1883, dealt with nature and dealt with the land and dealt with the fact that it does not care about you. It is there for itself. And if you're in the way, it will swallow you up. It will kill you. It will erase you from this earth. Animals don't care about us. The land does not care about us. Nature does not care about us. It is relentless in only doing what it does. And we're seeing that here. So there's a real through line to the 1883 struggles and what those pioneers had moving north. And it did get into winter and the cold weather, you know, towards the end of that show. That was the race for them, right? To get to Montana or get to Oregon or, you know, wherever they were originally trying to get to before winter set in. And we're seeing that here. And I think Elsa being a kind of a thread that connects the two of them is really hitting that home for me again, because we spent so much time talking about it in 1883, about how man by its nature is always kind of locked in a war with nature.
Yeah.
And we're losing.
Yeah, this is very difficult. You guys, I am very much looking forward to episode 3. I can't wait to discuss it. I can't wait to see everybody. Hopefully we get a little bit of sunlight coming through sometime, because some of our characters need a massive break here. And I want some bad shit to happen to the Whitfields and the Banners and the whatnot. Like, I need some bad business to happen to them, because everybody else is working so hard. And when you look at old Whitfield's life in comparison, I mean, he's over there like talking about like making our snow village and having this little ski place, and then you have the rest of our characters. It feels like they're in two different shows, you know, like his life has nothing to do with what's going on with the rest of our characters.
There are no wolves jumping through the windows in Bozeman right now.
No. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. This has been Pod Clubhouse, and this is Caroline.
And this is Mike. Thank you for listening to Yellowstone Podcast 1923 edition. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast and all of our podcasts over at Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And while you're there, if you could, please leave us a 5-star review. We'll gladly read it on the air. If you leave us a nasty review, we will not leave it on the air, and you'll make us cry. Please don't do that. We really appreciate you guys. Every time this podcast stays on the top charts year round, whether there's a show in season or not, we are so grateful and so thankful to all of you that listen and re-listen to our episodes, our very long episodes. And just thank you for being along the ride with us. And definitely we want to hear from you. Reach out to us at X, formerly known as Twitter, or Instagram, where we are Pod Clubhouse at both of those. You can leave messages on our website. You can leave messages on Apple, and you can definitely leave messages on Spotify podcasts now. Interact with us. Talk to us. Let us know what you think is happening in the show, what you have a problem with. Let me know what you hope to see in the show. We definitely want to interact with you guys and hear from you. And again, thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. This has been an original Pod Clubhouse production. Pod Clubhouse is a podcast network dedicated to encouraging collaboration among podcasters and friends to bring a fresh voice and diverse perspective on a wide array of content. Please visit and leave a comment for us at podclubhouse.com. Rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast feeds on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find us at Pod Clubhouse. Our DMs are always open, and we'd love to hear from you.
Pod Clubhouse.